This lab is a warm-up. We're going to go over what the project structure will look like. Generally speaking, the project structure for this lab will be repeated over and over and over again until you get to the final project, where then you're going to have to add a little bit more complexity. We're going to go over the tooling, how to render web pages, how to edit them, and how to debug JavaScript. Now, web development can be a little bit tricky because we're dealing with so many different technologies. So, and we're also dealing with two different execution environments. We have the execution environment within the browser, and we have the execution environment that's on the server. And those lines can be blurred now that we can use JavaScript on both the front end and the back end. Back in the olden days, it was pretty easy, right? PHP is on the back end, HTML, CSS with the front end. Everybody knew that you couldn't run PHP in a browser. Everybody knew that you couldn't run Python in a browser. But now with JavaScript on the back end and the front end, it can be a little bit confusing. So I'll try my best to differentiate that and separate those two environments over the course of this semester. And hopefully this project will help to get you in the right mindset for where your code is actually executing. So without further ado, let's jump into the code. Okay, so after you have cloned the lab from GitHub, you can open up the README here. And I always like to click the preview button so that I can read the README rendered. So read the overview. The videos are here. So this is this video. We have some VS Code and Get Installed help videos. Read the class coding standards, and then cloning and submitting videos. So the first task is to install the DevTools. So let's go ahead and run these from the command line, and we'll say npm. Well, first of all, let's pretend we don't have a terminal up, right? So we can actually do terminal. Just create a new terminal window. If you saw let's just do that one more time. If I hit, all right, and then create new terminal. If I just type in terminal, it'll show up. And here's the keyboard shortcut. It'll be different if you're on Windows, obviously. And so I want to say npm install. So this is a pretty critical step, because it will install any packages that are listed here. So we have the only packages we have that are necessary in our for most of our projects are going to be dev dependencies, meaning that packages that are there to help us write better code. So we're going to use ESLint, and we're going to use the Google configuration because that's as good as any. We're going to use HTML hint, which will help make our HTML more clean and correct. And then we'll use QUnit, which is a type of unit testing that we're going to use to test our websites. So now we have the npm install, which is all of our packages. It's actually installed under here on our node modules. Let's go ahead and run the site. Now, what we want to do is we don't want to install a whole ton of web tooling on our machine. Honestly, at some point you probably will have to install a web server like ISS or Apache or Nginx or what have you. But when we're developing at this level, we're just going to use the live preview built-in web server. So if you click here, this will take you to the marketplace and allow you to install the live preview. So go ahead and hit install, and you might have to restart VS Code. But once you get live preview built in, it's really, really cool. You can just open any HTML file, hit the preview, and it will render, right? And so you can see here, we don't actually have anything rendered. Well, that's because there's nothing here. So let's go ahead and test this out and go back to the README, and let's go ahead and modify the index. We'll just copy that, and we'll just modify it like so. And look at that. We now can see the results. So we're loading an image from our image. We're loading that image, right? We are, and don't worry, you'll learn about all these tags. We're loading a script. So we're loading JS and then our main. So that's what we're loading. Okay. And then we also added a title. And then we also loaded a style sheet. So here's our style sheet that we loaded. And then we referenced our unit testing. So the cool thing here is we can now actually write our code and you can see it live updates. See that? This is really handy. So one thing though is it updates so fast you can get some weird stuff until you finish typing, right? So it is extremely handy for when you're working on your website, right? So let's make it on an unordered list item, foo, right? List item, var, right? Really, really cool. We can see it working in real time. Okay, so that looks like everything is working. Okay, so if we go back over here, that means that we have, if everything is looking the same on your site, that means you have successfully installed the DevTools, you've successfully installed the live preview, and at a minimum, you can now edit and see what your HTML renders to. So let's go down here to task 2, debug JavaScript. Now this is going to be probably where you're going to get the most value out of all these tools. So step 1 is run your development server with live preview start server. Now in this case we've already started, just opening the index file and hitting preview starts the dev server. If we start it again, it's not actually going to hurt anything. In fact, actually let's stop it. Then let's start it, live preview. There is a task here called output, and under output there is a embedded live preview console, which is kind of handy because it will allow you to see what JavaScript. So this is what your console.log statements. This is where your console.log statements go. All right, so let's go over and open up our JavaScript. So we have our hello world loaded. And if we go over to the JavaScript and we hit main.js, because this is where we're at, you can actually see that this is the output. Our function loaded is saying hello. We can actually change that to say function was loaded. Right? So this is great to allow you to do printf or system.out.println, print debugging, right? So the classic got here function when you're trying to figure out what the problem is in your code. But beyond just doing printf style debugging, let's go ahead and do something that's a little bit more robust and go back over here and let's update our function to test our debugger. So we'll do this and we'll update, we'll replace it, hit save, okay? And now we want to debug this. Let's see, we see here we're printing out, and let's say we don't think this is supposed to be true. Let's say we think, oh man, that should not be 3, that should be 42. Well, what we want to do is we want to debug it. So to debug, we hit the run and debug, and there should be a debug website option here. It should be the default. Okay, if it's not selected, you can click this down arrow and it should show up there. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and hit start debugging. Now this debugger will only work if you've already live previewed your code, right? So we can actually double check to make sure that everything is working, because the debugger basically attaches to this embedded server. So I'll go ahead and hit run and debug. I'm going to hit debug website, and what it does is it actually opens up an external Chrome browser. Now this external link right here is kind of special because it is, notice like it doesn't have my profile. It's a plain vanilla instance of Chrome. There's no plugins here to mess with my debugging, and my debugger is now connected to this instance. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it, I'll make it small because we're not going to actually interact through this as much. And I'll go ahead and go over here, and I want to open my main.js. And now what I want to do is I want to actually, let's go ahead and close this. What I really want to do, there we go. So what I really want to do is I want to kind of single step this code to see what's going on, right? I want to see what the problem is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint in here, and I want to break on this line, on line 7. Now, I can refresh and cause this breakpoint to be hit in two ways. I can actually hit the refresh button right here, which will restart, or I can refresh over here. So let's just do this. And you can see here where I am now have a breakpoint. So it shows me right here, I am broken on line 7. And I can now inspect, here's our call stack. Okay. I can look at everything that's loaded, our main.js. Okay. I can look at my breakpoints. I can see that I have a breakpoint on line 7, right? Source.js. So that's pretty cool. And I can have my watch variables if I'm watching something. Watching basically means it allows me to set basically a monitor. It's like a hall monitor. Okay. And here's probably my most important right here, which would be the variables. So I can go through and I can look at what the variables are. Now right now bar, foo, and foo bar are all undefined. Well, that's because I haven't actually executed this code. So this is where I want to say, let's step over. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. There's step over, step into, step out. So step into allows you to step into functions, and step out allows you to step out of functions. For example, if you have another function called loaded2 and loaded called loaded2, you can either step over that function call, step into, or step out. In this case, we just want to hit step over because we don't want to go into any other, we're only concerned with what's happening in the loaded function. So if we hit step over, you can see that foo now is updated with the value 1, which is really cool, which makes sense because it's just been hard coded. And we update again, you can see bar has been loaded. And if we update again, we can see that foo plus bar equals foo bar, which is 3. So we do one more, and now we should be able to see our output. So it actually prints it right here, and it also prints it right there, which is really, really, really cool. So to continue, right, because right now our you can see that we're actually paused. If you look over here, the web browser thinks that we're still loading because it's paused. So to continue and basically release the page and allow it to continue rendering, we'll just hit continue, and there we go. Now we are back to just normal website. Now another thing we can do is we can also hit refresh here, and that will also cause the breakpoint to hit. Hit continue, and there we go. So that is how you debug your JavaScript, which would probably be the biggest bang for your buck on these tools. So I'll hit stop. That will close the instance of Chrome. And now I will go back over to the README, and I will hit back to my Explorer. Okay, so that's how you debug JavaScript, which is probably like out of everything, make sure you understand how task2 works and make sure that you can actually do what I just did, because that will help you immensely in future assignments. So let's talk a little bit about linting. So linting basically is a kind of an old school term. Oops. What linting means is just to make things clean, right? So the biggest problem with web technologies is, well, web browsers in particular, is they are extremely good at rendering bad code. So bad HTML, bad CSS, bad JavaScript. You can write code that makes no sense and somehow it just still works. So you need to keep that in mind, that just because your web page runs and looks okay does not mean that it's 100%. It does not mean that you're even right. JavaScript and HTML and CSS are extremely forgiving when it comes to bad code. So for the most part, I am going to expect extremely strict JavaScript. So you need to be just as strict as you do in Java, properly formatted HTML, and properly formatted CSS, regardless of whether or not it works. So for JavaScript, we're going to use ESLint, which is part of the packages that we installed over here in your package.json. So we're going to use ESLint. It will notify you when you have written code that is violating the standards. Okay. We're going to use, for HTML, we're going to use HTML hint, which is ran on the command line. And HTML hint is there to make sure it's as correct as possible, because there are some instances where if you're writing, partial templates, HTML hint is going to be wrong because your templates are actually going to be compiled. So that's why it's got to be, you got to know what you're running it on to make sure before you can make the judgment call whether or not HTML hint is wrong or not. CSS, same thing as HTML. For the most part, VS Code has support for the CSS, and it's good enough for the purposes of this class. So basically, if VS Code gives errors in your CSS files, then it's probably not correct. So at a bare minimum, you should be able to open up any CSS code in your any CSS file in VS Code, and it shouldn't scream at you with a bunch of squiggly marks. Okay, documentation. We require documentation in this class just like everywhere else. We're going to use JSDoc for all of our JavaScript code. JSDoc is really similar to JavaDoc, so you should be already familiar with how to use that. It's really, really, really similar. Go read the documentation. All you got to do is read the quick start or the getting start guide. It's really short. It's really easy, and it is almost exactly like JavaDoc. As you can see, here's an example right there. Here's an example documentation string. Okay, so running grading scripts. So in this class, we're going to use QUnit, and most of the grading scripts are going to be run in the browser context, because the browser context, you can think of the browser as like its own little mini operating system. And there's a lot of context, like the window context, that we need to be provided in order to make sense. So in any document, there's going to be a commented out portion here, and this is for you to test to see what you have passed and what you have not passed. You can actually go look at the tests right here. I don't actually really hide anything from you. You are expected to run this because this is what I am running on your program. So I would encourage you to definitely check this before you submit it. So let's go ahead and just uncomment this. Here's a HTML comment. We're going to uncomment that, and then we're going to live preview it. And you can see here that when we uncomment it, we actually have some problems. Okay, so we have two tests. We have two tests. The first one is test headers h1 tag. Okay, so that looks like that ran good. Now the second one is first image is a funny picture. So at least one image tag exists. So that looks like the good. Source attribute of first image tag. Okay, so image source. Okay, so alt attribute a first image tag. Okay, so expected funny image result null. So the diff. Okay, so actually we need to add an alt tag. So we'll go here, we'll say alt equals, funny image. Okay, looks like we just misspelled that. Funny image. And there we go. Now we can see that 2 tests completed in 6 milliseconds with 0 failed, 0 skips, and 0 to do, 5 assertions passed, and 5. So we're good to go. So that means that this project has met all of the basic requirements for grading purposes. Now there's still style, right? That is more difficult to run, and there's JavaScript, the JDoc, JSDoc. There's still more things to worry about, but this basically gives you a warm fuzzy that at least what you have written should pass the minimum required for this project or this lab. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's go back to preview. One thing we want to do is we want to actually, let's go ahead and just comment that out again. Put another comment there. And we can actually go back and open the preview, and we can see, right, there we go, back to normal. Okay, so finally, task 6, complete the retrospective, and then add, commit, push your code as normal, because if you don't push it to GitHub, then I can't grade it. So the retrospective is the same for every single project. Make sure and put your name, your email, and then fill out the experiences. So here's a little bit of brief instructions: experience, known issues or bugs, and sources used. And that's pretty much it. So for this warm up, hopefully after you get through everything, you should be completely ready to work on all future labs. And when we get to the section where we start to use more back-end technologies like Node.js, we'll step up the complexity a bit, but for the most part, this is exactly how you're going to be working on anything that you turn in this class. So I hope that this helped you out, and happy hacking. We'll see you in the next lesson.